This one just came in. A 4-year-old, high fever. The front desk nurse informed Catherine, the pediatric doctor. Misty, I'm fixing to leave in 5 minutes. My shift was over an hour ago, but I was just wrapping up some paperwork. Can you ask someone else to take that call, please? Catherine said. Catherine had been on her feet the entire day, hustling from one patient to the next, and all she wanted was to head home and collapse onto her cozy bed. The weight of exhaustion was bearing down on her, and her muscles were screaming for rest. The thought of kicking off her shoes, sinking into her soft mattress, and letting out a sigh of relief was the only thing driving her at this point. She couldn't wait to finally give her weary body the break it deserved. 10 minutes later, the nurse came back to Catherine. I'm sorry, but everyone's tied up with something right now. It's been one hell of a busy day. Can you please take the call? The nurse pleaded with Catherine, hoping she would be willing to help out despite her exhaustion. And Mrs. Johnson's out of commission too, otherwise I could have asked her to handle it. I don't want to risk getting canned for not handling this right. I really need your help, please, Misty pleaded with a tinge of desperation in her voice. Catherine let out a deep sigh and replied, Alright, give me the name and address. Thank you so much. I'll fill out the form and be right back, Misty exclaimed with relief and ran off to complete the paperwork. A minute later, she returned with a smile on her face and announced, You're going with Mr. Burns. I owe you one. As Catherine made her way to the location where they had received the call from, she went through the form, scanning the patient and parents' names. But as she came across the names of the father and son, she suddenly froze in her tracks. Sean Barnes? Huh, what a small world, Catherine thought to herself, feeling a mixture of surprise and curiosity. She had been married to Tim Barnes for the past 10 years, but they hadn't been blessed with any children. Meanwhile, the driver, Mr. Johnson, checked the address and groaned. Darn it, they blocked off the highway in that part of town. Looks like we're gonna have to take a little detour, he grumbled, maneuvering the vehicle through an alternate route to reach their destination. Once they arrived at the apartment building, Catherine made her way up the stairs to the second floor. As she knocked on the door, a young woman opened it, and Catherine had a feeling that she looked familiar. Thank God you're here, the young mother spoke nervously. We've been so worried. Many doctors said they were too busy, but you're finally here. Catherine smiled despite her exhaustion and replied, Well, my shift was actually over, but I'm here now. What's going on? Where's our little patient? Please come in. The woman invited Catherine in and led her through the hallway to the child's bedroom. Inside, a pale boy with dark hair lay on the bed, dressed in pajamas and warm socks. He looked up at Catherine with frightened eyes. Hey there, little guy. How are you feeling? Catherine greeted Sean with a warm smile before turning to the boy's mother. So what's been going on? Catherine inquired, concerned. He's been coughing for the past couple of days. It's not too severe, but it's been persistent. And his temperature spiked up to 102, the mother replied as Catherine began to examine the boy. Alright, let me take a look at your throat, Sean. Can you open your mouth for me, please? Catherine gently requested as she shone a flashlight into the boy's mouth to check his throat. Okay, I see. His lymph nodes are a bit swollen. Can you please get a glass of warm water? Catherine requested. Honey, bring a glass of warm water for Sean, the woman shouted. After a couple of minutes, a man in a cooking apron entered the room and handed Catherine the glass of warm water. As she looked up to thank the man, she froze in disbelief. It was her husband Tim, who had informed her earlier that he would be leaving on a 3-day business trip. As the reality of the situation dawned on both of them, they stood there in stunned silence, unsure of how to proceed. Despite the shock of the unexpected encounter with her husband, Catherine was able to maintain her professionalism and focus on the task at hand. She began explaining to the parents how to take care of their child. Alright, so here's what we're gonna do, Catherine said, addressing both parents. I'm gonna prescribe some medication to bring down his fever and help with the cough. Make sure he gets plenty of rest and drinks plenty of fluids. You can also give him some warm soup or broth to help soothe his throat. The parents listened carefully and nodded in agreement, taking notes as Catherine spoke. Also, keep an eye on his fever, and if it doesn't go down or if he develops any other symptoms, give me a call right away, Catherine added. Thank you so much, doctor, the mother said, looking relieved. We really appreciate it. Catherine smiled warmly. No problem at all, just doing my job, she said, trying her best to ignore the awkwardness of the situation with her husband in the room. After Catherine left the apartment, Tim immediately began calling her. However, Catherine repeatedly declined his calls when he saw his name on her phone screen. When Catherine finally returned home, She went straight to her bedroom and collapsed onto her side. She felt completely emotionally drained and couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Catherine couldn't help but ask herself, why? And how did Tim manage to keep this hidden from me for all these years? She felt betrayed and confused. She had trusted Tim completely, and now she felt like she didn't know him at all. She couldn't believe that he had lied to her for so long. As she lay there, tears streamed down her face. She didn't know how to confront him, or even if she wanted to. Her mind was filled with questions and doubts. She wondered if the entire marriage had been a lie. She eventually fell asleep, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the day. Catherine had always dreamed of having children, but things didn't seem to be falling into place. She was now beginning to wonder if the issue lay with her, since Tim had a child with someone else. The following morning, Tim arrived early and noticed Catherine's tired expression. He looked at her with guilt and lowered his head. "Catherine, there's something I need to tell you," Tim began hesitantly, but Catherine interrupted him by raising her hand. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Can you tell me one thing? Why have you been deceiving me for all these years? What was the purpose?" Tim was unable to speak. "I've always loved you, Catherine, but I also love the mother of my child," he said, breathing heavily. "We've attempted for all these years, Catherine, but unfortunately it hasn't worked out. I wanted to make it work, but..." What really happened was that Tim got drunk at a corporate party and started flirting with the new girl, Kylie. After the party, they went to her place. Once loyal husband decided to sleep with the young girl. Catherine remembered when he came in the morning saying that he slept on the couch with his friends after getting drunk. Shortly after, Kylie revealed to Tim that she was pregnant. It was at that moment that Tim realized he had always wanted to be a father. However, he was already married to Catherine and could not simply leave his wife or the mother of his unborn child. The fact that he received a promotion soon after was convenient for him, as he could use it as an excuse to take more frequent business trips when he needed to spend time with Kylie. From that point on, Tim began living a double life, doing his best to keep it hidden from Catherine. When Catherine heard his confession, she was silent for a long time. Eventually, she spoke up and suggested, "I know the child is not at fault and has no involvement in all of this. I understand you had dreams of becoming a father, but I think it's over for us. I want a divorce. They need you, and I can't continue to live with you after everything that has happened. I'm just letting you go." Tim felt relieved and grateful for Catherine's understanding, and he didn't try to hide his happiness. He apologized to her for a long time and explained many things, thanking her for her understanding along the way. However, Catherine appeared to be unresponsive and uninterested. She simply didn't care anymore. "They're waiting for you. Your son has a fever, you need to go take care of him," Catherine reminded him. Tim swiftly gathered his belongings and left without any further discussion. Catherine slammed the door shut after him, and once he was gone, she screamed and shattered the vase of flowers at the entrance. Anger at Tim's betrayal and disappointment that she had kept to herself all this time flooded her emotions. She destroyed everything that came in her way, unable to control her rage. Catherine only stopped when she heard a continuous knocking at the door. She glanced at the mess she had made across the kitchen and then opened the door. Catherine opened the door to find a tall man in a police uniform standing before her, looking at her with a surprised expression on his face. "Mrs. Barnes, is everything all right? Your neighbors called and reported hearing some loud noises coming from your apartment," the officer asked with concern. Catherine looked at the officer, surprised that he knew her name. "Have we met before?" Catherine asked the officer. "Well, actually we have. I brought an infant in for screening not too long ago. Remember?" The officer replied, smiling as he took off his glasses. "Oh yeah, I remember now. You brought in the baby that was found in front of a convenience store in a box. The poor thing was freezing. They took him to an orphanage afterwards. I remember you," Catherine replied. "The neighbors called and reported your address. I recognized it and decided to take the call. They reported hearing screams and crashes. What's going on, ma'am?" the officer inquired. Catherine was caught off guard and replied, "It's nothing serious, just some family issues." "I understand where you're coming from. I've been there too," the officer replied, taking a focused look at her. "George, right? Come on in. Don't just stand at the door," Catherine said, feeling the desperate need to talk to someone. Though she knew that a police officer might not be the best person to talk to, she remembered George from their work on the case of an abandoned infant. George looked around the apartment and noticed the mess. "Looks like you've been having a tough time," he said sympathetically. Catherine nodded, feeling a sudden wave of emotion. Yeah, it's been a rough day. The kitchen is even worse. That's where all the noise came from that the neighbors complained about, Catherine explained with a hint of bitterness in her tone. George sat down on the couch and motioned for Catherine to join him. Do you want to talk about it? Sometimes it helps to just let it out. Catherine didn't know why she had let him in, but she had a feeling that she could trust this quiet man with a judicious look. She invited him to sit in the living room and brought out some coffee and cookies. Thanks for the coffee, George said quietly. It's none of my business, but if you're okay with it, I'm curious about what happened. It's part of my job too, George said. Last night, I found out about my husband's other family. They have a child. It was ironic because he had a high fever and I was called in, Catherine replied monotonously. What did you do? The officer asked. I just did my job. Prescribed some medicine without showing my shock that the father was my husband? He came by to explain everything to me, but there was nothing to know. I told him that I'm letting him go. And then, I lost it. Then you showed up. Wow, you seem to be handling this well, George said as he looked at Catherine. I know exactly how you feel, believe it or not. I've been in the same situation before. I didn't break anything, but I was so angry and ready to fight anyone who crossed my path. Luckily, no one was around at the time. I really do understand what you're going through. Catherine listened, surprised. George had gone through a similar situation. He had thought he was the father of his son, but when his son needed a blood transfusion for surgery, he found out that their blood types didn't match. It was then that his wife admitted to cheating on him and that he was not the biological father of their son. After the divorce, his ex-wife and son moved to a different town, and George had not received any updates about them since then. He had been living contentedly as a single man for the past 3 years. After their conversation, Catherine and George spoke for almost 2 hours. Catherine was in the middle of telling George about her work when her phone interrupted. She checked the caller ID and saw that it was her assistant. Excuse me for a moment, George, Catherine said, picking up the phone. She sprang up in a panic and began to get ready. George looked at her with confusion and she explained, I'm supposed to be at work and instead I'm having a heart-to-heart talk with you. I'm running late and my boss is going to be angry. I have to go. Thank you for coming by and for listening to me. Anytime, Catherine. By the way, I can get you there faster than ever, George offered. Catherine agreed and they were on their way. George turned on the sirens and signals. I don't usually do this, but it's a special occasion, George said, smiling at Catherine. Catherine arrived at the hospital just in time for the meeting. Her boss gave her a disapproving look, but didn't say anything. After work, George waited for Catherine outside the hospital building with a smile. I was thinking about offering my services to help clean up the aftermath of the smashing that took place at your home, he said. Catherine completely forgot about the mess at her home. I can't even imagine what's going on there right now. Are you sure you want to see it? She asked George. George held the car door open for Catherine, but it was clear he wasn't really listening. Catherine, I live alone and my apartment can look worse than yours, even without any emotional crashes. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. After they finished cleaning up the apartment and taking out the trash, George suggested they grab dinner at a cozy waterfront cafe. I've actually never been there before. Never had the time, I guess. Are you sure you want to go? I really don't feel like it, Catherine admitted. Well, what could be better than having dinner in good company after a hard day's work? I'm sorry for praising myself too much, but I've been referring to you when I said good company, George joked and bowed. Catherine couldn't help but smile. There was something so captivating about this man that made her forget all her troubles. They talked until late at night, debating, discussing, and laughing until they cried about silly things in movies and jokes. After a couple of months, Catherine finally signed the divorce papers and felt a sense of relief that it was finally over. A few days later, her phone rang and it was George on the line. Hey, would you like to come over somewhere with me? George said over the phone. Catherine was taken aback when George drove her to an orphanage. She had no idea where they were going, and the surprise was even bigger when he showed her a fluffy baby who was studying a toy that hung on the cradle with great interest. That's the baby we found, George said excitedly. Catherine's eyes widened in surprise as she gazed at the baby in the cradle. I can't believe it, she exclaimed. She's grown so much. George explained that he had been keeping tabs on the baby's progress since they had found her, and had been volunteering at the orphanage where she was staying. Catherine was taken aback by George's confession, but couldn't help feeling a sense of admiration for him. After several visits to the orphanage, George finally mustered up the courage to make a surprising offer to Catherine. As they were leaving, George turned to Catherine and said, "Catherine, I know we haven't been together for long, but I can't help but feel like we have a real connection. I love spending time with you and with the little girl. So I was wondering if you would like to consider adopting her with me." Catherine was taken aback at first, but as she looked at the little girl, she couldn't help but feel a deep affection for her. She knew it wouldn't be an easy decision, but the thought of giving this child a loving home with George made her heart swell with joy. "I would love to, but I've never," she said, but George interrupted. "I understand that this may seem hasty and difficult, given all we've been through. However, why don't we consider creating a loving family together with this sweet little girl? It could be a wonderful new beginning for all of us," George proposed. As they continued to visit the orphanage and spend time with the baby, Catherine began to experience unfamiliar emotions. Her maternal instincts had kicked in and she would hold the baby, singing lullabies to her. George would watch with a smile, admiring the way Catherine interacted with the child. Today, he had a special surprise for her. He believed it was the right time. He knelt down on the ground and opened the ring box. "Will you be my partner in crime forever, Catherine?" George whispered. Catherine stifled a laugh at the unexpected and quirky proposal. The baby was snoozing in her embrace, making it an adorable and heartwarming moment. Catherine looked at George's face for a while, gently swaying the baby. Then she nodded and grinned. George's face lit up with joy. A few months later, George was returning home from a leisurely walk in the park with his daughter Amy. As he approached their doorstep, Catherine emerged from the house, her face radiating with a mysterious and joyful expression. George asked her why she was grinning like that, but Catherine just continued to smile blissfully, not saying a word. George grew anxious as Catherine continued to smile without saying anything. Eventually, she broke the silence and revealed the reason behind her mysterious expression. "I'm pregnant, honey. We're having a baby," she exclaimed. George's eyes widened with joy and he hugged her tightly. They were going to be parents again, and it felt like a dream come true. On Amy's second birthday, George and Catherine welcomed the new addition to their family, a son. They named him Noah. Patience is not the ability to wait, but the ability to keep a good attitude while waiting.